Hello, my name is Richard Haight, and today I'd like to address a question. In a previous post, previous YouTube video, which was that I posted, which was Elon Musk and Joe Rogan, Is Reality a Simulation? And it stimulated a little bit of a conversation through the comments sections. Some interesting points were brought up that could use some more clarity. And the first one is I talk about perception. And somebody asked what I meant by perception. So we're very limited by words, but the closest I could get to what the experience is when we're looking at the most, we're trying to get to, or at least let's say, sometimes in visionary experiences you get to very fundamental experiences. It's very important to understand, or to have these experiences, or at least have some recognition of these experiences. The first time that I had the stripping away experience, where the sense of self was stripped away, senses stripped away, was when I was a child. I used to go out on summer nights at in San Diego. We lived in North County, San Diego. It was a rural town, and there was very few people in that town. There weren't that many lights. And so I would go out in the lawn on summer nights when it might have been autumn nights. I don't remember, but they were very, very clear, crystal clear skies. And I would lie on the lawn and look up at the sky. And time would just slip away at some point. I don't know why or how. It just would. I mean, just this gazing process. I mean, maybe some of you have experienced that, but time would strip away, and then I would find myself in this experience where there was no sense of self. Like I was perplexed. What am I? Because who am I? What am I? All of these questions started to strip away because there was no. I mean, I first went through this inquiry process because there was really no content. I mean, it was as if everything pulled away, and there was nothing. There was no body. There was no. There was no me. There wasn't even memory at that time, during this period of time. How long this lasted, I don't know. When I was a child, it wasn't a fearful experience, though. That's very interesting, because a lot of people, when they go into this experience, is very fearful. But maybe I was pretty innocent, and so it was just an experience. But I remember kind of coming out of it and then having this memory or recall of this just nothing besides. It's hard to say it's nothing, though, and looking back on it now, and I couldn't have described it at the time, but there was perception just without content. There was perception without content, or at least we could say the most minimal of content. The only real content to go with the perception was feeling. It was feeling. And for me at this time, it was a rather blissful space to be in, I guess, or a blissful experience, a very comfortable experience. And it came on kind of slowly. It wasn't just a flash. Looking back on it, I can say that if I were to attribute any words to it, what was there and within that experience, there was perception without content. There was just the purest of perception, and there was some content, and feeling. Not the feeling of me, but just feeling in its rawest sense, most fundamental sense. And now, having had this experience later on through certain visionary processes that have just flashed in, you just launched into it, it can be terrifying, actually. It's like everything that you believe you are just sort of just strips away, and you don't remember who you are or what you've ever known or loved. And I talk about this in, for example, the psychedelic path. Salvia created that effect. It was just so unexpected and so powerful. It was like you falling into this abyss of meaningless hell. No content, but there was perception and feeling. It's just that the feeling was unbounded, and because it came on so suddenly, it was like a fear response. It triggered a fear response, and so the fear just multiplies millionfold, and it's this horror beyond horror, and there's this feeling that you'll never get back. But there too, there is perception and feeling. And so in the comment section, I wrote about what is perception. And in the comment section, the person said, "Oh, you're something like you're a very smart and rational guy, but it's important to recognize that I didn't come to these realizations through rationality, through rational thinking, and through what we would consider just standard intelligence alone." I mean, maybe that was a part of it, because after the experience, I had to actually then, find some words that sort of fit the experience. And unconditioned perception and feeling, which is a perception and feeling without specific content, would be the best description of it. So we could say that that's intelligent or rational, maybe so. But fundamentally, this was a revelatory process for me. Now, I do understand that a philosopher, for example, might be able to, through rationality, reductive thinking, get to this awareness. Get to those same words. But it's important to understand that they're not having the experience of it. It's just sort of an imagination. It's another kind of projection. It's not actually the experience of it. And the experience of it is very, very fundamentally, it's very transformative and powerful. Whereas reaching this conclusion of perspective or consciousness rationally may not include the experience of it. This is something that I've noticed a number of gurus will do. Recently, I've been watching some videos by Mooji, which, by the way, I love the Mooji videos. It's like, and in a lot of ways, pardon me, I hit my desk. In a lot of ways, I feel like he's my brother. I mean, it's like he's coming from a place I feel he's having the experience which I am having, and so I resonate very much with him, and we would have a wonderful time together. Were we ever to be able to get together? And but what I notice is that he's oftentimes using a kind of inquiry, the tool of inquiry, to help people find what he describes as the perceiver. The most fundamental thing is there is a perceiver, and I have two concerns about the words. One is again, using the questioning process alone. If the person isn't already in a deep state of presence, and then goes into the questioning process while able to maintain that state of presence during the rational process or the questioning process, whatever they realize, whatever the answer that comes will not be transformative, because it's just rational. It's just mind stuff. It's sort of imagination. And so now, of course, I'm sure that some people that are there in his presence, and they may be in a deep state of presence and able to actually go through the rational process and maintain that presence. I don't know. And so I'm just assuming that does happen. People have realizations. I've seen a few individuals that it feels like they are having an authentic realization. And then I've seen many others that are clearly, they're just caught in the mind. And the more questions you ask them, the more caught up in the mind they are. It's like this guinea pig running on the little wheel, because they're trying to find the right answer, and they're expected to have, in front of everybody's watching them, there's this pressure, and they got to come up with the answer. And that is actually counterproductive. And so that's the first concern that I have with the rational method, or the inquiry question is only functional if there's an underlying element already in place, which is, we could say that unconditioned awareness. If there isn't already awareness deeply in place, relaxed into expanded awareness, a felt connectivity to all it is, then the inquiry process is very, very valuable. And I use the inquiry process all the time. I mean, all the time, but I only use it in context with awareness. And so then the second element is, he would describe that you are the perceiver. You are the perceiver. And so that automatically, because of the terms used, and people are hearing these words and interpreting them through the mind, and because of the actual terms used, you are so there's one that's accountable, perceiver, subject. So now you are a subject. There's one of you, and so through the mind, it creates. It's just like creating a new sense of self. And the terminology is not entirely accurate. I mean, no terminology is accurate, but there is a more accurate terminology which we can use, which maybe his teacher, one of my students actually has sat with Mooji, and she informed me that his teacher was Papaji. I imagine Papaji uses the same, or used the same inquiry method. I don't know. I could be wrong on that. I don't have any experience with any of his teachings, and not watched any of his videos or anything. But the more accurate terminology here would be just the realization that there's perception. There be no need for a you. And this is hard for people to, it's like, what do you mean there's no me? There's no me. There's perception, most fundamentally. Relax into that. That's a beautiful thing. There's perception. When you can relax into that, something, just this huge weight just starts to lift off. Now, if there's the assumption that perception is without feeling, then it feels cold, and there's this, there's all this other mental projection going on to the word perception. But fundamentally, there's perception. There isn't a you that's thinking. There's thoughts arising. There's emotions arising. There's perception. There are many, many, many layers of perception. All of these layers of perception are interconnected, and they are fundamentally not different, although the appearances are drastically different. And the content of perception is constantly changing, if there is content. I mean, there's feeling, of course. Beyond feeling, if there's specific content, that specific content is constantly changing. And what happens is perception then starts to focus in on the specific content and cling to it. It kind of gets sticky. And that pulls perception into a sense of separation from all perception. So there's this perception, and there's that perception, and they're not the same. If we use the words that you are the perceiver, what is the other person? Are they the perceiver? Are you both the perceiver? It would be more accurate to strip all that away and say there's perception. There's a perception that's going through the other person's senses and that window, but there's also the perception that's coming through these senses and this window of perception, and that they're fundamentally not different. They're the same. Now, the filters of the body, genetically derived or more fundamental aspects of the body that would lend towards personality, that would lend towards a certain degree of energy or health in the body, vibrance, will be different. And so those filters will change perception. And so what we're doing in this process is we're thinning out the filters in a lot of ways so that we can see the primary perception. And it's not that the more layered perceptions that are on top of the primary perception we don't want to call them wrong, because you do need to be able to actually see through the senses so that the body can function in the world. We do need a name for this body so that someone can address this body. If someone just said, hey, you, in a crowd, everyone would look around wondering who they're talking to. So if they said, hey, Richard Haight, in a crowd, then this perception can realize, they're referring to this body. And it's not wrong. The disharmony arises when there's a clinging to the name, or what we would describe as the identification. And the clinging to identification can happen at many levels, name being one level, our job being another level, our, the emotions that happen that arise within this perception, the bodily perception, and the thoughts that arise in the bodily perception. There might be the identification. It is my thought. It is my emotion. And this creates the need to then protect that thought or emotion, or shun it, or blame it, or all this other stuff that now it becomes this war within. But simply recognizing that there is perception, and nobody owns it. There isn't an ownership of it. There's just simply it's perception that is happening, and that the content of perception is constantly changing. It is like a story with no author. People might say, well, but I'm thinking. Well, if you were really honest about this, if I asked you, okay, predict what you'll be thinking about, half a day from now, or even a half a minute from now, you're going to have thoughts that arise that you did not predict. And so there is thinking that's going on. There are emotions are going on that would be not quite as correct to say I'm thinking. It would be more correct to say that these things are happening. And so someone might ask, well, you mean I'm not thinking? Well, to answer that question, first you'd have to know what I is. What is I? If I equals the body, well, if we say the body is thinking, then yes, you are thinking in such case, if you are the body. But once one's had a sufficient degree of awareness, one recognizes that perception is not limited by the body. And therefore, to say that you are the body becomes a not quite correct statement. So we can say that more accurately, the body is thinking, and it's possible to have experience in the body without a sense of you. It's possible to have an experience within the body without a sense of you. This is the perception that is normal for Richard Haight, probably normal for Mooji. I don't want to assume anything, but it's very possible. So the reason we want to think that there's an I is because it gives us a sense of that we have some specific, we are here. I am. It's a fundamental truth. And that actually is what allows the greater perspective, the greater perception. It becomes a barrier. And if you look at it most fundamentally, there's a tightness within, but I am. And it's not different from at a fundamental level, it's not that different from the 16-year-old kid who removes a muffler from his truck and rides down the road at 3 o'clock in the morning and wakes everybody up. What he's screaming out is, I am, I exist, listen to me, I'm here. Pisses everybody off, but most of us are a little more tactful about it, but we don't like it when someone doesn't recognize our existence. So recognizing that clinging to the I am is also a limitation. And so we relax into the realization that there are thoughts, there are emotions, there's perception. And there are many, many layers of perception. And let's say a certain level of awakening allows for the shifting of the easy shifting of perception from the grand to the specific. It's as if there's a freedom to move between perceptions. and there isn't a clinging to one or the other. If we cling to the grand perception, then there becomes a judgment on the specific, that physical existence is wrong, the body is corrupt. It becomes nihilistic in the long run. If we cling to the specific, that can also become nihilistic because it's a hellish place to be stuck in the body when all these things are going wrong, especially if we're spiritually awakening inclined. A person that is not spiritually awakening inclined, they can just kind of subsume themselves in distraction and maybe not ever have a moment where they really recognize it's unconscious. They're actually going through an unconscious kind of hell, but it just doesn't register. They don't dwell on it. Don't give themselves any time to dwell on it. They just keep moving from activity to activity, passion to passion, joy to joy, distraction to distraction. And they may not ever actually come to the realization, oh, I don't want to do this anymore. I don't want to say that's wrong. That's what's happening. But for those who are in the awakening process, we're moving towards a flexibility, a softness, an ability to, so that the identifications become very transparent, and we can perception can move and shift from, it's like a lens that can zoom out or zoom in to the specific, zoom out to the total, and we don't attach to either. There's no attaching. There isn't a we, but there isn't an attachment. Perception doesn't attach to either. It just is able to freely roam the range of perception. And so that's a little bit about perception. Now the question then goes, this is what the mind will then ask is, well, what is perception? You see, now it wants to be able to identify and lock in and define perception. And that is, again, the attempt to control, the attempt to identify the self. And so there's a point where we recognize that the question, who am I and what am I, are no longer useful. And to play with these questions any further is to reach your hand into the fire and be burned, because it pulls one back into I am. It's a desperate clinging. We've probably experienced that. You can experience this in relationships when a person is clinging to you, and it's like, oh, give me some space, man. Give me some space, woman. But and so it's actually easier to be with someone when they're not clinging. When everybody's very comfortable with their skin, it's so much easier to just be. And so it takes a kind of softening and relaxing and unknowing. Don't try to understand everything. I mean, there's a degree of understanding that's useful, like, for example, the statement that there's perception happening. But at a certain level, even that's not true. It's possible to transcend perception. But during the transcendence of perception, there's no recall. So there isn't awareness of the transcendence of perception. So one may be in meditation and could be in meditation for hours or possibly days, weeks, with no content whatsoever, no perception whatsoever, no movement of the mind, not even feeling. It is as if the light was shut off. It's like the deepest sleep. You don't remember it like that. But it's not exactly sleep. Not exactly sleep. But that deepest level where it's not to say that there isn't perception or content. It's just that there's no recall. There's no recall. But it rejuvenates the body, clears the mind. So what happens is one is more and more aware. There's awareness of the specific body in its space and time. That's not wrong. It's necessary to be able to move through the room without bumping into walls or falling into holes, or to be able to actually feed this body to make a living and all that. But then there's also the perception of the totality, and these are going on simultaneously. There's this it's like foregrounding and backgrounding of awareness. So during very specific activity, like maybe reading a book, there's the background awareness of the totality. It's just going on lightly at all times. It's just sort of this awareness, general awareness that's undefined. It's total in all directions. It's relaxed. It's not effortful. And it's a kind of buoy. It makes the specific, what would normally be unpleasant experiences, much less impactful, much less. I don't like to use the word detachment because that heard through the mind is sort of an aloofness. It's almost like you're not engaged in life, and that's not what I mean at all. An awakened individual is highly engaged in life. I mean, it's infectious. They're very engaged in life. It's just that they're not trying to hold on to that which has gone past. It's like they're swimming through the water. When you swim, you have to reach into it, pull the water through, right? But when you pass the water, when you move through the water that you've already swum through, you're not trying to reach back and grab it anymore. You've let it go. So it's a simultaneous engagement and release. It's present. It's not detached or aloof or stepping back and judging and cool or anything. It's not like that at all. So the word detachment may have been used quite a bit, but it itself, the guru that's saying it may have a totally different understanding of the word than is normal people perceive it as. It's very important that we try to be very careful with our words, recognizing that anybody can misinterpret our words. But there are some words that are more, that lend themselves towards more misunderstanding than others. And so detachment is one of those words that can be quite misleading, quite misleading. It's not about being cool and aloof and all of that. That actually comes as a it actually happens when people are emotionally traumatized. Kids will say, I don't care. And you see adults, they go into this state when they've been overwhelmed, and they go into a detached state. It's like, you can see this PTSD, and they just like staring off into the distance. And that's detachment. And that's not what we're looking for. There's a joy in life. It can't be described as just detachment accurately. And so anyway, there's perception and there's feeling. And then we can say that within perception and feeling, there's also attitude. When all is stripped away, what's the attitude to unconditioned feeling and perception? If the attitude is fear, because you've lost everything that you're familiar with, then that experience is hell. If the attitude is a relaxing into and love this too, sort of this is perception, accept this too, love this too, then it turns into a blissful experience. And so I have a video which is called Your Two Biggest Fears, which I highly recommend. If you haven't seen that, go check that out. And then I'll go more into what I describe as the experience of the abyss, which is it's a kind of barrier in the awakening process, because until one moves through fear and starts to love whatever it comes, and starts to accept whatever comes without having nervous system reactivity, which means like fight, flight, freeze type stuff, one is in a way, even without awareness of it, unconsciously stuck in the abyss. And that creates a lot of negative emotion, anxiety, depression, what most people are experiencing in their lives. But that too is perception and feeling with a flavor of attitude. So I hope this video answers some questions. I've got, if anybody who's interested and not already signed up for it, there's an online spiritual awakening course that I have. It's free, that you can access at www.richardhaight.net, and you can just sign up, and the lessons will get emailed to you on a regular basis. And you might find that very, very helpful. It's taking spiritual authority in your daily life. And then also I'm offering online meditation classes. Those are, they're live, so you've got to actually show up. They are paid, so that you've got actual investment in the process. And then I teach that fundamental awareness through which inquiry and other tools of spiritual awakening can then be very, very useful. And so I'm going to be opening up a new class in October. If you're interested, go ahead and send me an email at contact@richardhaight.net. All this information is available below. Go ahead and subscribe. Happy you're all here, and looking forward to hearing from you. Thank you, and blessings. Bye-bye.